Welcome to this lesson on market attractiveness and Porter's 5 Forces. I'm Bill Crawford. I've been teaching business at BYU Idaho for more than 10 years. I own a small business that has given me lots of hands-on experience applying what I teach in the real world and bringing real-world experience to the classroom. Today, we're going to go deep on what makes a market attractive, why you care, and how to tell if a market is attractive or not. And finally, what you can do to improve your chances of success even in an unattractive market. A student once shared an idea for a business with me. He was frustrated that the BYU Idaho Outdoor Resource Center charged so much to rent snowboards. His idea was to start a competing business and rent snowboards for a much cheaper price. I wondered if this was a good idea or not. Was the snowboard rental business in Rexburg attractive? What makes a market attractive? And we're not talking about physical beauty here. Anytime you're considering entering a market, start by asking, is this a good idea? An important part of answering this question is to do a market attractiveness analysis. It will help you know if it's a good idea before you commit valuable time and money into the opportunity. Sometimes, after doing this analysis, it will become clear that you do not want to do that thing. Others, even though the market attractiveness analysis shows an unattractive market, you may still want to go for it because you can see a path to success that others don't see. In either case, you will increase your chances of success when you have a solid understanding of the market you intend to compete in. Some of the things a market attractiveness assessment can help you understand are: how much revenue and profit potential does the business have? How is competition likely to affect your business? How do barriers to entry affect your chances of success now and in the future? Which players in a market are likely to capture the most value, and which are likely to struggle to make attractive profits? This can help you choose which part of the market you want to compete in. Ironically, a lot of opportunities exist because people have different ideas about what makes a market attractive. Some people put the pursuit of profits as their highest priorities. Others want a better quality of life, or to do something they feel is of great benefit to mankind. For the purposes of this lesson, we will assume that the main driver of market attractiveness is profit potential, specifically the potential to earn returns that are greater than the cost of capital. What is a market? Market attractiveness is a way to understand where you will compete. This is different from how you will compete, which we'll answer in a different lesson. Where to compete refers to the market environment, not necessarily a physical location, but rather the set of competitors, customers, and suppliers that are all trying to capture value from a specific need or want. For example, Stukent is an educational software company based in Idaho Falls, Idaho. It would be a mistake to say that Stukent competes in Idaho Falls, even though that is where the business is physically located. Stukent competes nationally, providing educational content and experiences for thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of students. They have competitors across the country, other educational technology companies, as well as traditional publishers. So when you hear the term where to compete, think broadly about the customers and competitors who are engaged in satisfying a specific need. What makes a market attractive? As I said earlier, there are a lot of ways to think about what makes a market attractive. What are the goals of the business managers and owners? Is profit the most important thing to them? Do they want to make a quick buck and get out, or do they want to create a sustainable business that will last a long time? Do they have other values that are important to them, such as work-life balance, or intrinsic value, such as doing interesting work, or something to support a social cause? For the purposes of this lesson, profit potential will be the key to understanding market attractiveness. At the end of the day, businesses and investors have a lot of options for where to put their time and money. You want to pour your heart into opportunities that give the biggest rewards, and that includes profit, even if it's not the most important thing to you. We can represent how attractive a market is with a simple value bar. At the top, you have customer willingness to pay. Below that, price and cost. And lastly, willingness to sell. Willingness to pay is an economic theoretical value that represents how much a customer might pay for a product. The price is what the business actually charges the customer for that product. The cost is what it costs the business to produce that product, and the willingness to sell is the supplier's cost, or the lowest that the suppliers would be willing to sell. The difference between price and the cost is called the value captured, and that's really the profit. Some markets in general capture more profits than others. The difference between price and cost is what makes a market attractive or unattractive. You may have heard of Porter's 5 forces, one of the most common tools taught in business schools for understanding market attractiveness. I personally struggled to get it. It was easy to see how the different forces interact with each other, but harder for me to see the value in doing an exercise to know if rivalry was high or low, or how barriers to entry mattered. It seemed too academic and not very useful in the real world. But as I have gone through my life, I realized that I use some form of this idea all the time when I want to know if something is a good idea, or to predict if a business is going to make a lot of money or struggle. Michael Porter revolutionized the way people think about competition when he described 5 forces that act on all businesses. Before that, people largely only thought about competition among rivals as the main force to make a market attractive or not. Porter realized that businesses are actually in competition not only with each other, but also with their suppliers and customers to capture value. He also realized that the threat of new entrants and substitutes affected how much value companies could capture, because new entrants would lead to increased competition, and substitutes gave customers bargaining power to switch to something else if prices got too high. All of these factors can still be simply a stupid academic theory unless they're used to get specific insights that can be acted upon. For example, companies can actually do things to create barriers to entry so other companies will have a harder time getting into a market. I have a friend in the mining industry who bought a watermelon farm in southern Arizona. His boss thought he was crazy buying a watermelon farm, but the farm came with water rights, a scarce resource in Arizona. Mines need lots of water to operate, so buying the rights to the water supply created a barrier to entry that gave an advantage to my friend's mining company and a disadvantage to any other mining companies that might want to compete with them. Porter described 5 forces that act within each market: rivalry among existing competitors, the threat of entry, bargaining power of suppliers, people the business writes checks to, bargaining power of customers, people who write checks to the business, substitutes, and complements added later. You will often see the 5 forces represented as 5+1 boxes, oriented relative to each other to represent, in a loose way, how value flows through a market. Now let's define each of the 5 forces in a little more detail. We'll start with incumbent rivalry. Incumbent rivalry is another way of saying competition among existing players in a market. The way I think about who should be considered a competitor is to look at the world through my customer's eyes. If a customer considers buying from a specific set of companies to satisfy their needs, then those companies are rivals. For example, when I travel, I might consider flying with Delta, United, or Southwest Airlines. Since they all do a very similar thing for me, fly from where I am to where I want to go, they're rivals. When rivalry is high, profits will be lower because prices will be lower and costs will be higher, making the market less attractive. When rivalry is low, profits will be higher because companies can charge higher prices and keep their costs lower, which will make the market more attractive. It's common for students to believe, wrongly, that price is always the most important competitive factor. Don't people always just go for the lowest price? If that were true, brands like Nike, Coke, Adidas, and Apple would not exist. They all price their products higher than their competitors, and yet somehow people still pay for them. Price is the most damaging competitive lever because it simply transfers value from market participants to customers and is the easiest thing to copy. You should only compete on price when you have a cost advantage. We'll go into that in another lesson. Rivalry will be high when There are a lot of competitors. What does a lot mean? It depends on the market. I think about the number of competitors relative to the number of customers in a market. If there's enough demand from customers not being satisfied by the current competitors, then the number of competitors is relatively low. Alternatively, too many competitors trying to attract not enough customers means the number of competitors is high. Another factor affecting the intensity of rivalry is undifferentiated products or services. Differentiation means that a product is better in some way that matters to customers. It can't just be better. It has to be better in ways that customers will pay more for. Even if there are only a few competitors, if their products or services are pretty much the same, then rivalry will be high. In my business, I only have 2 main suppliers for the majority of my products. But since the materials I purchase are the same no matter who I buy them from, I'm able to negotiate great pricing because each supplier is motivated to get my business. Another reason rivalry would be high is if the market growth is slow. Slow market growth means that in order for one firm to grow fast, it will have to take share from competitors. Conversely, when a market is growing fast, companies focus less on their competitors and more on serving their customers, which makes rivalry less intense. Switching costs are another thing that can make a market more or less attractive. Low switching costs will make the market less attractive. Switching costs are the costs that customers have to pay to change products or services. They aren't always financial costs. Sometimes the cost can be the time or effort required to switch. Gasoline has a low switching cost. Every time you fill up your tank, you can switch to the lowest priced option. Mobile phones, on the other hand, have higher switching costs because you have to pay to break your contract. And even if the contract is up, migrating your data and learning a new operating system can be a pain. Another factor affecting rivalry is high exit barriers. Sometimes, once you're competing in a market, it can be difficult to get out of it. Barriers to exit can include long-term leases or contracts, specialized assets or equipment, legal and regulatory obligations, and brand or reputation risks. In situations like this, competitors are more likely to slug it out rather than leave. Next, let's talk about the threat of entry. Threat of entry means how likely is it that others will enter the market. When the threat of entry is high, you can expect others to enter, which will drive prices down and drive costs up, making profits lower. The opposite is true if the threat of entry is lower. New entrants are less likely to come into the market, which will allow incumbents to keep their prices higher and costs lower, making profits higher and the market more attractive. Threat of entry will be low when barriers to entry are high. Barriers to entry will be high when companies benefit from economies of scale. Economies of scale means as the number of units produced increases, the average cost per unit decreases. Economies of scale generally come when a company has higher fixed costs and lower variable costs. For example, a software company might invest millions of dollars developing its product, but the variable cost of the product is near zero, so the company can make a lot of profit when it gets very large. Conversely, a dental practice will not benefit from economies of scale because each patient needs to be seen by a person who performs the service. Since one person can only see so many patients in a day, more dentists will be needed as the practice grows. Economies of scale come from low variable costs and high fixed costs, purchasing power, operational efficiency, marketing, and branding. Another barrier to entry can be customer or brand loyalty. Imagine you want to start a massive online retail business to rival Amazon. It might not be all that difficult to design a website and get some inventory to sell, but the Amazon brand will be hard to replace in people's minds when they want to shop online. Capital requirements are another barrier to entry. Capital requirements refers to the amount of money it takes to get started in an industry. High capital requirements can be a good barrier to entry, but it's important to note that what you might think of as high capital cost might be ridiculously low to a large corporation considering entering a market. When I started my business, I needed about $500,000 to complete the construction, buy equipment, and hire and train people. It took nearly all of my life savings to get started. But for a large incumbent like Apple or Microsoft, $500,000 or even $100 million might not be a high barrier. Think of this relative to the size of the companies in the market and the resources they have to invest. Another barrier to entry can be access to distribution channels. For example, Walmart is a distribution channel for thousands of products. Have you ever noticed that Walmart doesn't have any empty shelves just waiting for new products to be stocked on them? Getting on the shelf at Walmart is challenging. Once your product is there, it has a barrier to entry for others because shelf space is limited. Customer switching costs can also create a barrier to entry. If customers have high switching costs, new entrants will have a harder time attracting customers to their new products. Finally, government policies can also create barriers to entry. Some markets are highly regulated by the government. The medical device industry, for example, has to comply with strict regulations to get a product approved for use in patients. It can take years of research and development and testing to prove the product is safe according to FDA regulations. This can cost tens or even hundreds of millions of dollars. Let's talk about the bargaining power of suppliers. Think of suppliers as everyone the company writes checks to. This includes employees, raw material suppliers, distributors, contractors, and so many others that we can't really name all of them. It's a good idea to narrow down the suppliers list to those that are specific to the market. For example, even though every company pays for electricity, unless you are specifically analyzing the market for energy, you can safely assume that electricity isn't relevant to your analysis. Let's go back to the airline industry. The major cost drivers for airlines will include aircraft, maintenance, air crews, fuel, and airport costs. You are looking for the big cost drivers that are unique to the market you are analyzing. When suppliers have a lot of bargaining power, costs will be higher and profits will take a hit, which will make the market less attractive. When suppliers have little bargaining power, costs will be lower and profits will be higher, which will make the market more attractive. For example, in the airline industry, air crews have formed unions, which give them more bargaining power. Because air crews can negotiate better pay and benefits for themselves, the airline's costs go up, reducing the profits they can earn. Supplier bargaining power depends on three main things. The first is outside options. If suppliers have a lot of other customers they can sell to, they will be less inclined to give bargains to the market participants. Some things to consider when assessing outside options include the relative number of suppliers there are compared to their customers, differentiated products, and switching costs. The second thing that affects supplier bargaining power is the availability of information. A startup educational firm is negotiating a contract with a major university and wants to know what price to propose for its services. Knowing the university's budget would be a huge help in setting the price. Keeping that information confidential gives the university more bargaining power than the startup proposing the contract. And the last thing that affects supplier bargaining power is price sensitivity. Some suppliers are price sensitive because they earn low margins and cannot afford to cut prices very much. Sometimes, people are simply driven to seek the best prices and will negotiate harder than others. Walmart built a strong reputation as being price sensitive. They hire people who fit that profile and reinforce it in everything they do. Our next force is the bargaining power of customers. If suppliers are the people the business writes checks to, then customers are the people writing checks to the business. They're the ones giving their money to the business. It's that simple. When customers have a lot of bargaining power, prices will be lower and costs will be higher, making profits lower. Think about what a company has to do to attract customers when they have lots of power. Either lower their prices or sweeten its offerings with perks that drive costs up, without being able to increase their prices. The opposite is true when customers have little bargaining power. Think about how much bargaining power customers have when buying life-saving medicine from a big pharmaceutical company. If the medicine is protected by patents and is the best alternative available to save the patient's life, the customer has little bargaining power and the pharmaceutical company can charge higher prices. Customer bargaining power depends on the same three things as supplier bargaining power, just on the opposite side of the bargaining table. Outside options is the first source of customer bargaining power. If customers have a lot of outside options to choose from, they will be in a better position to demand lower prices. As I said earlier, price is often not the most important consideration when making a purchase decision. So if a product is differentiated, willingness to pay goes up even when there are lots of options. If there are lots of companies trying to win the business of a few customers, or switching costs are low, or there are a lot of substitute products, then the customers will have more bargaining power. Next, availability of information also affects customer bargaining power. If customers have better information than the market participants, then they will have an advantage when bargaining. The internet has created some really cool examples of this. Suppose you wanted to buy a used car in the days before you could do research on the internet. The seller had all of the information about the car's history, and because used car dealerships do a lot more transactions than used car buyers, they had an advantage over their customers in knowing what a car was worth. A customer never knew if they were getting a great deal or getting ripped off. Used car salesmen were famous for being dishonest con artists. Now, customers can look the vehicle history up and get market data based on recent transactions. This shifts the balance of information toward the customer, reducing the bargaining power of the used car sellers and evening the playing field. Price sensitivity is the last factor affecting customer bargaining power. Price sensitivity simply means that customers are willing to pay less for the product or service in that market. When customers in a market are more price sensitive, the sellers can't bargain as hard with them. Income level, availability of substitutes, differentiation, competitive pressure, economic conditions, and perceived risk are all things that affect price sensitivity. The last two forces we want to talk about are the threat of substitutes and complements. What counts as a substitute or a rival can sometimes be confusing. A substitute refers to a product or service from a different industry or category that can fulfill a similar need. To keep it simple, a substitute is anything a customer might choose if they didn't buy the specific product or service that best solves their needs. For example, say I want to take my family to New York for a vacation. The most convenient and fastest way to get there would be to fly. But flying to New York from Idaho might cost us $5,000 or more. Driving would be a much cheaper alternative, but it would take us days to get there and we'd have to stop overnight somewhere. In this example, driving is a substitute for an airline. Even simpler, if you've ever seen someone use a wrench, a screwdriver, or a rock to drive a nail, you have an idea what a substitute for a hammer is. Complements are the last of the forces. A complement is something that makes the product or service more valuable to customers. Think about how apps make a mobile phone more valuable. The app without the phone is not very useful. And the phone without apps is not as valuable. The presence of complements makes a market more attractive because prices will go up as the product becomes more valuable to customers. Now that we know a little about each force and how they work together to affect market attractiveness, let's go deeper into how to tell if each force is high or low. This is the most useful way I've seen Porter's 5 forces applied. Suppose a friend of yours is considering opening a soda shop in Rexburg, Idaho. She heard you studied market attractiveness in business school and asks if you think it's a good idea for her to enter this market. Let's apply the 5+1 forces to see if the market is attractive or not. Incumbent rivalry. Is it high or low? Is the threat of entry high or low? Do suppliers have a lot of bargaining power? Do customers have a lot of bargaining power? And how will the presence of substitutes and complements affect the market? I want you to pay attention to the way I apply the framework to this example, so you can do it yourself on a real market. Think of this as going through a checklist to assess each of the forces using real market data to support my work. How intense is the rivalry in the Rexburg soda market? Is it high or low? To assess how intense rivalry is, let's use the following criteria we discussed earlier: number of competitors, differentiation, market growth rate, switching costs, and exit barriers. How many competitors are in the Rexburg soda shop market? A quick Google search showed there are 13 soda shops in Rexburg. This may not be all of them, since I know of at least 2 others that didn't show up in the search. Is that a lot or a few? It's a good idea to find something to compare it to. So I searched soda shops in Lehi, Utah, and found 6. So Rexburg has more than twice as many soda shops as Lehi, Utah. Ultimately, you're looking for a way to understand how likely a new shop is to get enough customers to make it worth going for it. Let's compare the number of soda shops to the population, just to get an idea of how many potential customers there are per soda shop. Rexburg's population is approximately 41,000 people. Divide this by the number of soda shops, and you get a little more than 3,000 people per soda shop. 3,154 to be precise. Is that good or bad? We don't know. Lehi, Utah has a population of approximately 92,000 people. This means there are roughly 15,000 people per soda shop in Lehi, and that's roughly 5 times the number of potential customers in Lehi compared to Rexburg. So the number of potential customers per store is a lot lower in Rexburg, making the number of competitors in the Rexburg market very high compared to Lehi. Next, let's look at differentiation. Remember, differentiation means not just different, but different in ways that customers will pay more for the product or service. How might we determine if products are differentiated? We'll need to do some research on what these companies offer and how they might stand out from each other. I chose the top 4 competitors based on my Google search results: Mountain Pop Shop, Pick Me Up, Fixology, and Great Scots. All of them offer some variation of Coke or Pepsi products or energy drinks, with 30 or more flavored syrup combinations and creams or purees as add-ons. Some offer cookies or other treats as well. Fixology has the broadest menu, a dining room, and is close to the BYU Idaho campus, which will make its costs higher, but may also bring in more customers. But the real proof of differentiation is the company's ability to charge more for its products. So I did some research on that. Here is the price breakdown for each of these competitors. I compared 32-ounce specialty drinks with no add-ons. What I found was, for a 32-ounce specialty drink, Fixology could charge $3.45. Pick Me Up drinks, $3.84. Great Scots, $3.18, and Mountain Pop Shop, $2.96, for an average of $3.36. It looks like Pick Me Up and Fixology have some differentiation from Great Scots and Mountain Pop Shop. Great Scots is located in a gas station, and Mountain Pop Shop is in a trailer a few miles from the center of town in an industrial parking lot. Comparing just the products, there appears to be almost no differentiation. But when you consider the location and dining options, there is some. Overall, I would assess differentiation as low for the flavored sodas themselves, but medium for the brands. The next thing we want to talk about is market growth rate. How fast is the Rexburg market growing? I think Rexburg has been growing like gangbusters the last few years. That doesn't mean the flavored soda market in Rexburg is growing, but without specific market research on the flavored soda market, we can use population growth to get an idea how fast the market is growing. Again, business strategists don't state their guesses as facts. You need research and evidence to support your hypothesis. According to World Population View, Rexburg's population had explosive growth in 2020, but the current growth rate has slowed to 1.27%. Compared to other Idaho cities like Nampa, Meridian, and Caldwell, Rexburg's growth seems relatively slow. So we'll put market growth rate as low for Rexburg. Switching costs. It costs nothing to switch from one flavored soda to another, so switching costs are low. But if we consider brand loyalty and a person's preference for one particular flavor combination that might be slightly different from competitive offerings, switching costs are higher. Overall, I assess switching costs as low. Lastly, let's talk about exit barriers. If someone got into this business and it wasn't working out, how easy would it be for them to close shop? Let's refer back to the barriers to exit we discussed earlier: long-term leases or contracts, specialized assets or equipment, legal and regulatory obligations, and brand and reputation risks. A soda shop might have a lease, but it would typically be relatively short. 5 years is short in the commercial real estate market. They have no specialized equipment, and legal and regulatory obligations would be negligible. So barriers to exit are low. This will reduce the intensity of rivalry. Think about barriers to exit like gladiators in an arena. If the gladiators can leave any time, they're not as likely to fight it out. But if they can't leave, they're stuck in there, and the only way to survive is to keep fighting. Overall, we can now confidently say that incumbent rivalry is high, which makes this market less attractive because prices are likely to be lower and costs higher, squeezing profits. Now that we have taken a deep dive on how intense rivalry is likely to be in the Rexburg flavored soda market, we need to see how the threat of entry may affect the market as well. If barriers to entry are high, the threat of entry will be low, and vice versa. Recall that we can look at the following things to assess the barriers to entry: economies of scale, consumer or brand loyalty, capital requirements, access to distribution channels, customer switching costs, and government policies. Let's talk about economies of scale. Do Rexburg soda shops benefit from economies of scale? How can we assess this? Let's look at variable costs versus fixed costs, purchasing power, operational efficiency, marketing, and branding. Variable costs versus fixed costs. Soda shop variable costs include the syrup, the cup, carbonation, and the lid. According to Pan Gregorian Enterprises of Upper New York, 3 gallons of syrup yields 72 servings of 32-ounce drinks. At a cost of $65 per 3-gallon container, the syrup costs 90 cents per serving. The cup costs 22 cents, the lids cost 6 cents each, and the straw costs 3 cents. The Torani syrup cost per shot is about 14 cents. The beverages we did the price research on had 2 to 3 flavor shots in each. So the total cost of the cup, the syrup, the lid, straw, and flavor shots comes to $1.56, assuming the average drink has 35 cents worth of flavored syrup. Using the average price for a 32-ounce drink of $3.36, the variable cost is 46% of the sales price. This is a high cost of sales, which reduces the opportunity for economies of scale. Purchasing power. Some of the soda shops in Rexburg may benefit from purchasing power, especially if they have multiple locations and high sales volumes. This will give them an advantage in lower purchasing costs. The advantage will only go to companies that get big, so it's not a good thing for our new entrant. Operational efficiency. These soda shops all employ low-wage workers to produce the product. Without automation or technology, operational efficiencies are not likely to be a factor, so they are unlikely to get a lot of benefit from operational efficiency. What about marketing and branding? Here, think about how many people you can serve relative to how many customers you can reach with your advertising. If I have only one location in Rexburg, and I pay for an ad on the local radio, I might reach 200,000 people with that ad, but only people in Rexburg will visit my store. The competitor that has 10 locations pays the same for an ad, but gets 10 times the benefit. The main players in this market have multiple locations, which gives them the ability to reach more customers with fewer marketing dollars, giving them some economy of scale in this area. Overall, Rexburg soda shops do not enjoy economies of scale due to the significant variable cost and manual labor that go into their products. Therefore, economies of scale will be low. Next, let's talk about customer or brand loyalty. Do the competitors in this market have unusually loyal customers? If so, it will create a barrier to entry, which will make the market more attractive to incumbents but less attractive to new entrants. Fixology and Pick Me Up have created reasonably strong brands in the market, so this makes the market less attractive for our new entrant. Let's talk about capital requirements. The startup costs of a flavored soda business are very low. You can get into that business for a few $1,000s. Therefore, capital costs are low. What about access to distribution channels? For this market, the distribution channel is going to be the physical location. This will depend on the company's ability to find real estate and negotiate favorable terms. It is not a significant barrier to entry. What about customer switching costs? These will also be low, so not a real barrier to entry here other than brand loyalty, which I previously mentioned. And there are no significant regulations or government policies other than basic food and worker safety, so no barrier to entry for government policies either. Overall, the barriers to entry are low, which makes the threat of entry high. With the threat of more competitors, the market is less attractive. Just because it's easy to enter a market with low barriers to entry doesn't make it a good idea. It actually makes the market less attractive because in the long run, with more competitors, you're likely to capture less value because there's going to be more price competition and higher costs. Let's look at how the bargaining power of suppliers will affect the attractiveness of the Rexburg flavored soda market. Remember, supplier bargaining power increases when they have outside options, asymmetric information, and price sensitivity. Let's use this lens to help us predict if suppliers will have greater bargaining power than the soda shops. First, let's consider outside options. Suppliers will have better outside options when the relative number of suppliers is few compared to their customers. They have differentiated products, or their customers have high switching costs. For this analysis, we'll focus only on the soft drink suppliers, but we could do this for all relevant suppliers, especially Torani. So for the number of suppliers, it's Coke and Pepsi, and they've created a near monopoly in the carbonated soft drink market. They have few relevant competitors, so they have a lot of options when it comes to who they choose to sell to. This gives them a lot of power over the soda shop operators. Let's talk about differentiated products. While Coke and Pepsi may seem to taste the same, consumers have strong preferences about which is better. This perception creates differentiation, which adds to the supplier's power. How about switching costs? Switching costs are relatively high for the soda shops. Once they enter into a supply agreement with one of the major suppliers, the brand loyalty their own customers show the suppliers, plus the difficulty of implementing a new supply agreement, again gives the suppliers a lot of bargaining power. From this analysis, we can conclude that suppliers have a lot of outside options that give them bargaining power over the soda shops. How about availability of information? Coke and Pepsi service thousands of fountain beverage accounts, which gives them detailed pricing and sales volume information that the soda shop owners don't have. This is another advantage to Coke and Pepsi. How about price sensitivity? Because Coke and Pepsi are in such good financial shape, it may seem at first that they are not price sensitive. However, a lot of their distribution is outsourced to local bottlers who operate on very thin margins. Also, both companies have established processes of regular price increases, which they routinely pass on to their customers, in this case, the soda shop owners. Overall, suppliers seem to have all the bargaining power in this market. How about the bargaining power of customers? Okay, so suppliers have a lot of bargaining power. Let's use the same 3 criteria to see if we can find an advantage bargaining with customers. Note, this doesn't mean customers will be able to haggle down the price of their favorite flavored soda, but it does mean if prices are too high, they will go somewhere else to get it. So let's look at outside options. First of all, is the number of customers relative to the soda shops high or low? Earlier, we figured out that there are about 3,000 potential customers per soda shop in Rexburg, which was way lower than the roughly 15,000 potential customers per soda shop in Lehigh. My assessment here is that there are actually a lot of competitors relative to the number of potential customers. so power goes to the customer. Differentiated products. Sorry, but from a customer perspective, a foam cup filled with the same flavored soda with shots of Torani syrup is pretty much the same anywhere you go. This gives customers more bargaining power. And switching costs? Customers have a lot of choices among soda shops, so again, power goes to them. What about the availability of information? Customers don't have access to the detailed cost structures of the soda shops, and soda shop owners do have access to detailed customer information from their purchase histories and contact information. This gives the soda shop owners some power over their customers. Lastly, let's talk about price sensitivity. Rexburg is famous for its price-sensitive customers. However, flavored soda drinks may be considered an affordable luxury. It's not very expensive, and paying an extra $1 for something fun and unique doesn't deter a lot of people from purchasing. Low price sensitivity for this particular product likely gives the soda shop owners an advantage over their customers. Overall, my assessment is the bargaining power of customers is medium. Now let's talk about substitutes and complements. There are more substitutes for a flavored soda than we can even name here. Canned beverages, regular carbonated fountain drinks, juices, sports drinks, and water. The presence of these substitutes reduces the bargaining power of the soda shops, but only a little, because the flavored sodas are differentiated from the substitutes in serving size, flexibility, and uniqueness. The presence of substitutes, in my assessment, does not make the market less attractive. And lastly, let's talk about complements. Complements to flavored soda shots might include hot foods, such as hot dogs or hamburgers, cookies or chips. These items are available in many of the same places where the sodas are sold, making the flavored sodas more valuable. The impact of substitutes and complements goes to the soda shops. Okay, so we've assessed each of the 5+1 forces for the flavored soda shop market in Rexburg. So what? Let's take a look at it from the big picture. With rivalry high, threat of entry high, low bargaining power over suppliers or buyers, there are not a lot of markets less attractive than the flavored soda shop market in Rexburg. I want you to take a minute and think of 3 things you might tell our friend who wants to enter this market. And no, don't do it doesn't count. Think of how you might win, given the competitive landscape we have assessed. There are no right answers here, but there are lots of wrong ones. Here are some things I came up with. I stopped at 3, but when you do this, you need to go deep and come up with as many insights as you can based on what you learned about the market. First, the soda shop needs to find a way to differentiate itself. Differentiation will make the new entrant more attractive to customers, helping win business. Remember, differentiation means not just different, but different in ways that matter to customers and make them willing to pay more for your product. Creative product names seems to be an easy thing to do. All of the other soda shops have them. That is a must, but you'll have to take it further. Think about the customer experience as a whole, rather than just the liquid in a foam cup. Make sure the entry and exit to the store are clear and clean. Create a place to socialize, not just grab a drink and go. Create a thoughtful playlist that reflects the vibe you're creating. Design the customer experience to include excellent customer service, speed, and accuracy. Second, create some switching costs for customers. I would do this through creative branding and a loyalty program. Now, loyalty programs are easy to copy, buy 10, get 1 free, or earn points for every purchase. So this loyalty program has to be different. I will connect it to the brand. Earn branded merch as you reach specific milestones. At 100 points, you get a free members-only sticker. At 500 points, a limited edition t-shirt. At 1,000 points, you get membership into the Champions Club, an invitation to a private party or a VIP event or a local concert. My third idea is to create outside options for the soda shop itself by creating a private label brand of carbonated soft drinks. That's right. Since Coke and Pepsi have so much power over the soda shops, one way to get that power back is to backwards integrate into their business. This means going into the carbonated soft drink market, which may sound like a fool's errand, but it will help the new entrant in the soda shop market differentiate itself from competitors while at the same time reducing its own costs. This gives it a double advantage. I'm so thrilled that I got to share these powerful ideas with you. It's a lot to take in. But understanding what makes a market attractive is an essential skill for a business manager. And knowing how to assess a market's attractiveness will help you differentiate yourself in the job market. I can't wait to see how you apply this in class, but more importantly, in your career and in your life.